Good morning, this is Norma Cowie for Norma Talks. This week I'm going to revisit a topic I've spoken about before, but sometimes one needs to hear something twice, or there are others out there that have subscribed recently that may not have heard this. One of the things I am asked often, and people act as though being psychic is a rare or it's a gift. I don't believe it's a gift. I believe that we're all born with it. Some of it perhaps a little more than others, like some people are born that they can run faster or they can do things quicker in some respects, or they're stronger. But I believe that we're all born with our natural psychic abilities intact. And what are those abilities? We all have a sense of intuition. That's because of our chakra system. That's because of the other elements that are inside. So some of us are born with that beautiful intuitiveness that goes on. But we have everything else. It took me a long time to put it together that for every sense we have, we also have a psychic sense. So that means we have psychic eyes, which we know we call clairvoyance. We have psychic ears, which we know, which we call clairaudience. But when I began to discover there was also a psychic nose and a psychic mouth, that began to open things up. And very often I find with clients when I'm working with them that they have a very strong psychic nose or a psychic mouth. And they're always there. I say, do you kind of sometimes get a funny taste in your mouth and you wonder why? And they say, oh yeah, oh, I do that. Or you have a funny smell. And they'll say yes, and they have a strong psychic nose. Now, I have told this story before because what put me onto this, as I already knew through my work that there was a psychic nose, but I have a cousin in New Zealand who worked in a bank, and she was great at detecting fraud. So she was given the job of teaching other people, other bank tellers, how to detect fraud. So when I was down there visiting, one of the times on my visits, we talked about this, and I said, well, how's that going? And she said, actually not as good as I thought I would. And I said, well, how do you detect? How do you know that something's not right? She said, I smell it. I immediately broke out in a little smile and probably a little chuckle as well. And I said, well, what you're going to realize is that most people do not have an active psychic nose, which is what you have. So you need to find out what they have. Does it look different for their eyes? Does it smell different for their nose? Or does it sound weird? Sometimes people it's a sound. It just doesn't sound right. And so we had a chuckle over that because her psychic nose. And the other thing, I had a gal that used to work with me. And I don't like reading the contracts I used to have to sign, and I would give them to her and I say, look over this contract for me, just take a look, see what you think. And she would read the contract, and sometimes she would hand it back, and I want you to really look at this, Norma, because it smells fishy. And that's what began to put the psychic nose thing into place. It smells fishy. Why would you say it smells fishy? Because her nose was working. And sometimes that whole element is overlooked. So how do we take that element of ourselves? How do we take that and have that work so that it works more for me? Now, I'm prejudiced because I began my journey with the tarot when I was, 20 years old? 20 years old, I think I began. And I was fortunate, as my life has often been, put me in the right place at the right time, to have a teacher that was devising a brand new method of reading them. It wasn't traditional fortune telling, or there wasn't an old Kabbalion way that they would have, or anything else, the Kabbalah, etc. It wasn't that way. It was brand new. And to me, when I look back, what it was a psychological look at reading, so that you got to understand who you are. There's a psychological way of approaching that. And I was fortunate. So here I am many, 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 many years later, still reading them, still teaching it, still acknowledging 3 books on the tarot alone. And now coming out very, very shortly as a whole set of videos that people can get so that my teachings can continue on. Because now I'm getting kind of near the end. I have to look at how can I keep this work moving further. And especially when it comes to this psychic work, I'm going to look at that as to how I can teach people to create and work with their psychic abilities. I mean, I've done workshops for years, but I have a different way of teaching it. You see, first of all, what I began to discover was that inside where our physical pituitary and pineal gland is, but in the etheric level, we have a command center where we have an inner eye, an inner ear, an inner nose, and an inner mouth that takes that information that's coming up from the chakra system and works with that. Now, it also understands the physical, that command center. It also knows if it's physical or not physical. And most people don't have that all activated. So one of the things I do in my psychic class, believe it or not, is activate all that up. Have all the systems working, because you are actually, if you were born centuries ago, and you've had lives back there, most of you probably, your senses were developed. You knew if there was an animal in the forest, we'll say, or you knew when something was going to happen, or you knew when something didn't fit right, because those senses were developed. Well, as we became more civilized, a lot of those senses got not utilized so much. Some of us were still left with them. Some of us still had the ability to see or to know. Now, I was not clairvoyant when I first began. I mean, I was just a person, didn't know too much, but I had a lot of curiosity because of my background, because my grandmother, now we're going back into the late 1800s, early 1900s here. She did some magical things, which my father told me about. She could heal people. She could take headaches away. She could do automatic writing. They believed in angels. So I grew up with all this knowledge and awareness. I also learned years later when I learned, I went back visiting, and I said to my dad, show me how my grandmother used to heal headaches, because he did mention to me she used to get the headache. No, well, why would you heal a headache if you're going to get it? Didn't understand it. So he showed me, and I smiled to myself and I said, do you know, if she had just flicked her hands out in a way, she wouldn't have got the headache. And that's the difference between people learning and not really knowing how everything works to today, where we have far more knowledge on how energy works. So she used to just go like this on a person's head, but because she would be pulling it back into her own aura, and because she pulled it back into her own aura, she would get the headache, but the other person would be free. So to her, she was healing them. If she had I'm going to move my hands back and away, she would have moved it beyond her own aura, and she would not have got the headache. That's the signal of how, not the signal, that's how we have learned so much more from, that was at the beginning of the 19th century, and how we've progressed in the sense and knowledge of energy and the sense of knowledge of all sorts of many other things. And also because of where I've been placed in this world, to take a look at how these senses and how these abilities can be honed more. Now, a lot of people think that as I walk around, I know what they think. I do not know what they think. That is, some people do that, but I'm very clear that when I'm working, doing a reading, doing a transformation, doing teaching or whatever, I'm here. Other than that, you get me as I am, which isn't always overly in tuned, because this is an energy that I want to be able to utilize when I want and have to use it. It's not something to waste, not something that's pretty. I always say psychic energy is a little bit like a beautiful little brook or a river running down the side of a mountain. It's just running along, and it looks very pretty and it's very nice. But if you dam that river and build it up, you can get electricity. So you have power. And the thing is, what you're working with is with a natural power. How does that power work? How does that power come through? Is it to your advantage? You can look pretty and have, people say, oh, sometimes I get these messages, or sometimes I get that. But what if that was utilized much more effectively? If you knew, for instance, where to go to listen, We're going to talk about, I've talked about high selves and things. Quite often I find in the transformation work, the high self says to me, they're not listening. They have so much mental activity going on. They're not listening to me, and they don't hear what I have to say to them. And it's like knowing the difference, knowing how, when, where, how does all that work? We are complex, wonderful, I don't want to use the word machine, I'll just say human being. We're wonderful. We have many, many talents that we can use. And a lot of people today are not using their natural born given talent. They're not using what we call the psychic senses. They're not using their own intuition. And if they do, it's hit and miss because they don't know where to listen. They don't know where to go. They don't understand. Well, I'm not going to talk about chakras today, but I will again another time because I know it's not that long ago I gave a talk on the chakra system. The chakra system that I was showing, actually, that's where, for me, it's been important because, yes, I had this teacher for 3 years, and I've had a couple of other teachers for another one for 3 years. Excuse me, and I've studied certain other things that have all come together. But a lot of my learning has come through my sleep, taught in my sleep when I was younger. I have had things come to me all of a sudden, click, 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 and it's like, oh, that's how that works. And so over time, I was shown and brought to be aware of the difference of a chakra system than what most people work with and utilize. So there's a lot of learning you can gather if you're just open for it. But the thing is, you've got to put it all together. And often I look at people's lives, and it's like, it can come in two ways. Sometimes it comes as a jigsaw puzzle with pieces missing from the jigsaw puzzle. And sometimes it's like a patchwork quilt. And the patchwork quilt is not complete. There's holes in it. And that's often what our philosophy or our sense of what we really understand is. What are the holes? What are the bits and pieces that we can utilize to work with? And that's what I really work when people come to study with me or have access to my work, is what are the holes that need to be filled up? Then, of course, it's their responsibility if they actually do that. Do they go ahead and do that? Sometimes they don't want to take the time or they don't want to work on it. But what I found is the majority of people that I work with that are really wanting to understand lives improve. And isn't that all what we want? We want to have a more fulfilling life. We want to be able to just be happy or contented. I think as I've gotten older, contentment is a large part of where I hang out to a degree. Doing things I like to do, being aware, just knowing that every day the sun comes up is another blessing, actually, because there'll come a time when I won't be here for that sun to come up. And that's why, and right now I'm beginning to look at how can I leave what I know so other people can utilize it. For those of you that have subscribed to this channel, for those of you that have sent friends to watch or listen or shared, I really, really want to thank you, because I know my views and are not what is common. It's not in the mainstream often. It's kind of off to the side. But I want you to understand those views work. It's nothing that I teach here, nothing that I say, nothing that I work. It's not that I haven't utilized. I haven't worked with myself, that I have taught others how to work with it, so that it becomes aware, that you become aware you are more than just flesh and bone. And I have spoken about the soul and the journey of the soul, and perhaps I'll do that again. But I felt today it was really important to go back to some basics of who we are. We are more than what we think. We are more than what we see, feel, hear, and touch, because there's another level, and that is the vibration, that is the awareness, that is the truth, that is the essence of all that which is there. And so it's like reaching beyond our thing. I talk a lot about auras, and I'll probably talk about that again, because like most people have their auras way too big. They're picking up everybody else, especially if they're, quote, sensitive beings. And then they wonder why their life isn't working and why they get scrambled and their minds aren't working well. So there's many, many, many subjects which I've touched on before in the over 2.5 years I've been doing this. but we're going to be looking at some of those again. So I want to thank you for watching today. And remember, you can always contact me through my website, normacowie.com, and send me an email, and I can go from there and get back to you for sure. So I just want to thank you so much for watching, so much for being there, so much for supporting. It's all appreciated. I thank you so, so much. You have a good day now.